What's happening, everybody? This is Mike's Total Dragon Channel, and as everyone knows, um, absolutely love comic books. And today, I thought I would show some of my favorite comics that I have gotten autographed. Now, these are only a few. I got a ton of comics that are autographed, but a lot of them are trades, and I didn't really feel like digging out a whole bunch of trades or omnibuses or absolutes or whatever you want to call it. So I grabbed 10 individual issues. Actually, I got 11 because I had one alternate. So I wanted to grab a couple of individual issues. People, today's youth like to call them floppies. I, however, will be in the cold, hard ground before I call a comic book a floppy, at least in an unironical sense. I will never call it a floppy. I will just call it a fucking comic book. I cannot bring myself to say floppy. I'm sorry. I'm an old man, and that is just a hill I am going to die on. So I'm going to show you and talk about 11 comic books that I have gotten signed that really mean a lot to me. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of them and kind of the story behind it. So now these are going to be not in any particular order. So I'm just going to start off the top here. The first one I've got, Lobo's Back #2. Now this is signed by Simon Beasley, and the whole big story about this, as you can probably clearly see because he drew it, I got this signed by him. And also got Keith Giffen to sign it. This is Keith here, rest in peace. And this is Simon here. Now, the whole story about this comic here is the Biz, he snuck in a picture of a dong right here on the elbow. So that is snuck in, and that got past DC editorial, and it got put onto the cover and made it out into the wild. And that is his name's here, and that is why you see the twig and giggleberries right here with a little bit of coming out the tip. But I got this signed by him at New York Comic Con, and I got it signed by Giffen at Heroes Con in Charlotte. And when I told him that I had got Beasley to sign it when I was in New York, the first thing Keith Giffen said to me, he goes, "Oh, I was surprised he was sober enough to sign it." So that was kind of a really crazy thing. For those of you, if you're wondering what kind of like the gist of the story is, Lobo died in issue 1, and he is brought back to life by people in the afterlife as a woman. So that is why he looks like a big manly arm, and then the rest of him is, kind of like feminine or what have you. So that is number 11. That's a alternate, but I guess it doesn't really matter. There's an alternate considering I don't have any particular ranking for any of these. But in any case, up next, I got this signed by Dan Parent at Heroes Con. And this is the Archie Love Showdown special. One of the things I like most about it is it's Archie with Cheryl, who I absolutely love. If I had to rank the 3 women in Archie's life, I would go Cheryl 1, Veronica 2. I would put Betty 3rd. But this is kind of... this was initially advertised as this is the story that settles who is Archie going to choose. And through classic Archie mix-up, Betty and Veronica end up fighting, and they finally decide to not be friends anymore. And Cheryl ends up entering the picture. So it ends up looking like Archie has chosen Cheryl over those 3. So that was the way that Archie Comics kind of did a hey, Archie's finally going to choose between Betty and Veronica. and they kind of advertise it as that, and in reality he's with Cheryl here. So it's kind of a little bit of a bait and switch technique, but you know, that's comics. So up next I have New Warriors #1. I have gotten this signed by both Mark Bagley and Fabian Nicieza. And the reason I had this book signed by both of them is I was probably I was probably a sophomore when this book came out. So I was absolutely the audience that they were looking for, Marvel was looking for in this book. You know, I was someone who was a teenager. You know, I was of the MTV generation, you know, so all the hot button topics that they explored here in this book was things that I was constantly being bombarded with and seeing on a daily basis or whatever. But I really consider this some of Fabian and Mark's best work. I remember when I have this in omnibus form too, and I've got both of them to sign it. And Mark was kind of dismissive about signing it. He didn't really enjoy any of his work on it. So that was kind of a letdown. That was kind of a buzzkill. But in any case, I think the first 25 or 30 issues of this is some of Fabian Nicieza's best work, period. For the first 25 issues of it, now I have not read it since it initially came out, so of course, you know, that's all in the nostalgia, my memory of reading it. So I'm not sure how it you know, holds up these days, but I absolutely remember loving it, and I have incredibly fond memories of it. And I've got current in my stack. I've got a complete run of this volume 1 of New Warriors that I put together recently, and hopefully over the Christmas holiday coming up, I'll be able to pull it out and binge it and read the whole thing from start to finish. So up next, West Coast Avengers. I got Steve Englehart to sign this at Heroes Con last year, and I enjoyed talking to him. For some strange reason, this was one of the only books that I was able to find regularly. At the time when this book was coming out, you know, the small town I was living in, there were no comic book shops or anything. You picked up stuff at the drugstore, the gas station, or the grocery store you went to. But for some reason, West Coast Avengers was the only book I was able to find regularly. So I was able to pick up issues of it month after month after month in order. And getting Steve Englehart to sign this was a real joy. His writing, although after rereading it now, it feels incredibly formulaic, but his writing and the way that he wrote this book, West Coast Avengers, was really one of those books that brought me in and kind of got its hooks in me. Up next, Guy Gardner. I got Joe Staton to sign this. He was the artist on the book at the time, and this was one of my favorite books. I loved his artwork on it. I loved the portrayal of Guy Gardner as a jerk superhero. I think the fact that I like him so much is why I've been a fan of the jerk superhero, as I like to call it. And to me, Joe Staton, he's the quintessential Guy Gardner artist. I just loved his portrayal of him. It's just like a rough, super macho, you know, shit kicker. I mean, look at these big cowboy boots. So this was one book I was really big into at the time, and getting Joe to sign it was kind of a special little treat. And this next one's kind of a change of pace. Sting, the wrestler, not to be confused with the artist. He came to the town I live in for a small wrestling con, and he was there. Not in makeup, however. I guess he saves the makeup for bigger cons. And I brought this old Marvel Comics and got him to sign it. And I got my picture taken with him. So that was kind of cool. And that's the reason I've got it on here, is it kind of is something that's a little different from the rest of the books. Up next, Adventures of Superman. This is the first appearance of the clone, or the clone Superboy. Although he would get pissed off if you called him Superboy. He preferred to be called Superman. But I just loved this character so much at the time. Again, it's a common theme through all these books. He came out when I was younger. I was a teenager. And I just really dug the character. I really enjoyed the work that Carl Kessel and Tom Grummett did on him. In fact, I told Tom Grummett, I said, this character you designed, this character here, this is in 93, and they still cannot find a costume for him that's better than what was designed by Grum back then initially. Every type of redo of Superboy's costume they try to give him just ends up falling flat. So it's a great design, and I was really lucky to have both these guys who were so responsible for that character to sign this book. Up next, Roy Thomas on Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew. Now, this is one of the funny animal books DC put out in the early 80s. I remember loving this book so much as a young kid. I mean, I was in elementary school, that me and the other kids, we would play as being these characters on the playground. And I loved this comic book as a kid. It's incredibly hokey now. I reread it. I put a run together about 2 years ago and reread it, and it is full of so many animal puns. But it really holds a special place in my heart as a little kid, loving it. And I got Roy Thomas to sign it, and I'm sure he doesn't remember really anything about it, but I quite enjoyed it. Up next, Web of Spider-Man. Now, this is just a generic filler issue that Jim Shooter wrote. And the purpose behind this issue is it was just an issue for some strange reason I remember reading to death. Like, I think I read this until the book fell apart or something. This is not the original copy. This is just a copy I found. But it's just really a generic filler issue. Nothing important happens. Spider-Man has to play touch football with some kids, or the fate of the world is at stake. And it was just another just really weird comic that it's one of the ones that pulled me in to the hobby. And it was a joy to get Shooter to sign this book. And if you ever meet him, he is somebody that will talk your ear off. That man is a talker. So it's, you can learn a lot from him if you've got the patience to sit there and listen, because he loves to talk about himself and his accomplishments. So up next, this is All-Star Squadron, and I got this signed by Roy Thomas and Jerry Ordway. They're the writer and the penciler on this book. Now, this is the earliest comic book that I remember having. I mean, I might have had some other stuff that was like, Archie or Donald Duck or what have you. But this is the first comic I remember having that was superheroes. And this is the one I tell people all the time when they say, do you remember the first one you had? And I say, this is it. And there's no way that anyone would get into, because I was just a small child when this came out. I want to say it came out like in 83 or 84. So I was 7 or 8. And this is a multiverse World War II story with heroes who are not like anyone that I see on television. So it didn't really make any sense to me, but I just loved it and read it over and over and over and over again. So that's why it frustrates me when people say that they want to get into comics but don't know where to start because it's so confusing. I don't fucking know where to start with this thing. I mean, look at this cover. Look at these aren't people that were like on Super Friends cartoon, and there's like this spaceship, and it's set in World War II, but it's really in the 80s when I'm reading it. So I just knew whatever I was looking at, I just knew that I loved. So that's how I got involved in it. Now, I did save this comic right here for last. Power Pack #1. It is signed by June Brigman and Louise Simonson. And all I have to say is this comic was my absolute favorite comic book growing up. As a kid, I used to have pretend adventures with the Powers kids. And it was, the story of it is basically they're brothers and sisters, and they get superpowers, and they have to keep it as a secret from their parents. And man, it just hit me. I much like the New Warriors book would do when I was a teenager. As a young child, 8, 9, 10, Power Pack grabbed me like that. And so when I got a chance to get this copy signed by the artist and the writer, I couldn't pass up on it. And when I met Wheezy and I told her I loved that comic book so much, I'm not going to lie to you, I did get choked up when she said that I reminded her of the two brothers, Jack and Alex. So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to front. I did get a little misty about that. So it was a really great book that I loved for a really, really long time. And the first 25, maybe 30 issues of it are a really great kids book. I'm sure nowadays you would find something that's a lot better graphically looking, or maybe a more poignant storytelling or something. But man, at the time, it really hit home for me, and it did its job, and it wrote me in. So I was really proud and happy to get that one signed. But that is a few of my favorite individual issues that I have signed. I've got a bunch more, but those are the only ones I could grab and put my hands on to make a quick video about. Maybe next time I'll do one with my omnibuses and absolutes or bigger books. But they're so big and they weigh so much, it's like a chore to dig them out. But any case, those are my favorite autographed comics. And I always get my stuff made out to me, Mike, because that just shows that that they're for me personally. It's not something I'm going to go put on eBay. And just lets the artist and the writer know that, I really appreciate their work. And that's why I get them personalized to me. So until next time, you guys take care of yourself. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.